Andres Ayala.
Kevin Butterfield.
So good to have you here. Welcome to the Sanctuary Podcast.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
It's so good to have you here. This is actually the second time you've been on the Sanctuary Podcast. Is that correct?
It is. Last time I was on, we were talking about We Get Close.
Yeah.
And Rob was here, and he got far.
He left.
Right.
Yeah. So that better not be the pattern of what happens when you come on.
Hopefully not.
Yeah.
Well, thankfully,
both of us
nobody's
will still
joining us.
That's
yeah.
good. Yeah. So We Get Close. That was part of our core value series.
Yeah.
That even we did a whole other series, an appendix series called We Get Closer.
Right.
Talking about relationships and yeah. Andres Ayala, it's so good to have you here. For those of you who don't know, Andres is part of our staff here at Black Rock Church. Andres works with Fusion, our high school ministry, and but you're also part of the Sanctuary community. Is that right?
Yeah. I was thinking about it last night, and it's crazy to think. I think I've been a part of Sanctuary for probably about 7 or 8 years.
Wow.
So I would say the first summer was probably very unofficial. I made sure nobody knew me. So.
Wow. So talk to me about that, Andres.
I'm an introvert. I don't like meeting new people. I hate small talk. I hate the whole like, hi, oh, you're new here. Oh, that's great. Tell me more about you. No, I'll just walk in. So I used to come in during, that's when we had Sanctuary in Woodruff, crazy times. So I would come in during the second.
For those who don't know, Woodruff Hall is kind of a smaller fellowship hall that we often have meetings in.
Yes, multi-purpose room.
Yeah.
So I would walk in during the second song, sit all the way in the back, make sure nobody got to talk to me. And then right after the sermon, I would stay for one song and then kind of creep out during the second song, get in my car and leave.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you were like a back row Baptist.
That's right.
And so, by the way, I came from a Baptist background, so I can actually use that term. Before I get offensive emails, you see, and you're like, you're dissing on Baptists. I was one.
Was recovering.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I come from a long line of Baptists all the way back to Sweden, so.
Oh, that's good.
I can make fun of other Baptists. Sorry.
Good. No, it's okay.
Good. So only a Baptist can say back row Baptist. But so you were sitting in the back row, and that was your introduction. The slow entry into community.
It was. That's when we used to do God on Film. Josh Fay would preach through kind of different films and how they had biblical kind of value and kind of would point out just different biblical kind of principles that you could take away from these movies. So, it was good times.
Those are good times. I have a hard time sometimes not watching movies with that lens on. Seeing the gospel in unusual places.
You're better than me. I'm just watching a movie to watch a movie.
Yeah. Sometimes I do that too. Like, I don't watch Dumb and Dumber going, oh, what are the gospel themes in this movie?
You should preach through that one.
That's
See if we can find any.
I'd love to do Nacho Libre. That would be a whole nother.
I don't think the Sanctuary community is ready for that.
Well, he's a monk, and so he lives in a monastery.
No, I get it completely. I just don't know if most of your young adult staff hasn't watched the movie, so.
I know. I'm still working through that. It's early days. That will be a requirement for annual reviews next year. But so, Andres, tell us a fun fact about yourself that other people don't know. So, but before we get to that, where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Bridgeport, Brookfield, back in Bridgeport, and probably from sixth grade all the way up to high school, went to school in Fairfield. So I went to a really small school called Umpqua. And then I went to Fairfield Prep.
Wow. So Connecticut boy, born and raised.
That's right.
203 your whole life, too.
Yes. Yeah. Because Brookfield was 203.
Yeah. For those who don't know, that's the area code of Fairfield County in southern Connecticut.
Yeah. Who cares about 475? That's a weird one. Or 860.
Weird. Hello.
I know. Yours is 860.
It is 860. But I'm a 203 boy.
Right.
Born and raised. So.
Yeah. So you know what's good. You know what's better.
Apparently. I don't know what 475 is. That's just
That's like random. Stamford area.
Those are the carpetbaggers who moved into the state later. Just joking, sort of. So, born and raised in Connecticut. Tell us about your ethnic background.
Sure. I'm Puerto Rican. Yeah. That's it. That's all we got.
That's good. I love it.
My parents kept it simple.
I love it. Yeah. So, Andres, I love that about you because we could talk about a lot of different things that we don't have in common, or at least in our experience growing
Yeah.
up. But we do have a common love for Puerto Rican food.
Yes. There's
So-
nothing better.
Yeah. For those who have never had Puerto Rican food before, and
You're missing
live
out.
in
That's
Fairfield County, what are your like top Puerto Rican restaurants around here?
My family's house.
Okay. When are they open? Hours and address, please. No, I'm just joking.
My stepmom would say, don't just stop by. But if you did, she'd probably throw food on anyways.
Okay.
That's just part of the culture.
Nice.
No, if we were talking about restaurants, I really love Coquito out
Yes.
in Bridgeport. It's kind of right by Bass Pro Shop.
Yep.
So super good, really, really good food.
Authentic?
Very authentic. I think that's the biggest kind of, I don't know. I don't want to go to a restaurant and eat food that's kind of like, eh. And that's even kind of growing up. My dad was very set on like, why would I go out to a restaurant to eat food that I can have at home?
Even better.
That's going to be better at home.
Yeah, that's true. But Coquito's great because, first of all, the food's amazing.
Yes.
But if for those who are unfamiliar with Puerto Rican cuisine, it's not like looking at a menu and trying to figure out what everything is. You actually see it in front of you.
Right,
It's
right.
It's like
Yeah, it's kinda like a
cafeteria
buffet.
style,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
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 And so you can ask questions.
Usually.
Usually, it helps if you know some Spanish, but
Yeah.
depends on who's helping you out. But you get at least to see the delicious varieties of food, and it all looks amazing.
Yeah, you just want one of everything.
Exactly.
You're like, can I have 3 different tins?
Yeah, exactly.
Not just one.
$60 later,
Right.
You're
So,
figuring it out.
and the great part about Coquito that probably nobody would even assume, so they have what we would call ice cream. That's not really ice cream. It's like an icy kind of, and you can get it in all different kind of fruit flavors. It's delicious. You would never think to go to like this place to get ice cream, but like when I was in high school, it was a place that my best friend and I would be like, oh, I want ice cream. Let's just go to Coquito and get some watermelon. It's like sorbet, watermelon sorbet, but it's just so fresh, tastes so good.
So is it like an ice cone that they add flavor to it, or it's already mixed in?
No,
like a
no, no.
gelato or a sorbet?
Yeah, it's kind of like like gelato sorbet.
Okay.
Not creamy though.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
More
it's-
icy.
Yeah, more icy. It's delicious.
And more fruit flavors, or
yeah, no, definitely just fruit flavors.
Okay, so no like caramel, no salty flavors.
No, just fruit, and it's so good. I love it.
Nice. And coquito is Spanish for.
Coconut. No, yes, coconut.
I thought it was a little frog. The coquito.
No, that's a coqui.
Oh, coqui. All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
coquis are the little frogs.
Okay.
When you go to Puerto Rico, that's all you hear.
And they make that noise all the time.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, that's all you.
Coqui,
Yeah,
coqui.
all throughout the night. It was actually like at first you're kind of like, oh, this is annoying, but then you're like, oh, this is soothing. But also, if you're inside, most places don't have central AC, so you've got an AC just roaring, so you don't hear anything at all.
Okay.
It's the white noise of the AC.
Which is a win-win factor, probably.
Oh yeah.
Awesome. So, yeah, we do have a common love for Puerto Rican food. My favorite Puerto Rican food is probably pernil, which is slow roasted pork.
Oh yeah.
Flavored with garlic adobo paste and other. It's delicious.
It is. It is
Life-changing.
Yeah. I mean, it's life changing when I grew up where when we would have big parties, my grandfather would wake up at 4 or 5 in the morning, go outside, and they actually had a whole pit outside and would roast an entire pig. So you knew before a big party, you would walk into the living room and there was just a full dead pig
Nice.
in a bag in your dining room.
Whole hog roasting.
Oh yeah, and not like we're not talking about like little baby pig.
Yeah,
We're
I
talking
gotcha.
about
Piglet.
Oh yeah, it's a porker, man.
Nice.
Literally a porker. but yeah, that's delicious. I would say kind of if we're looking at traditional stuff, my favorite meal is white rice, and my grandmother would make chicken stew, which is basically what we would call pollo guisado. And it's so flavorful. It's my favorite thing. When I moved down to Florida for college and I would go and visit her, she would make me an entire pot.
Wow.
And would let me take it back to my college dorm. And I would just feast on that for days. So,
Nice.
yeah.
Now I'm hungry.
Yeah. Well, I didn't eat breakfast either.
Exactly.
So my coffee's holding
We'll
me
have to
over.
do this again. Give us the fun fact about Andres Ayala that we don't know.
Fun fact, something you don't know is, so while I was at Fairfield Prep, I was actually captain of the bowling team. So not something I'm really proud of. It's not like,
But that's so unique. I think you should be proud of that.
no, because most people laugh at me when I say it. They're like, who wants to be captain of the bowling team? But really what it was I had a favorite teacher, Miss Muma. We would hang out in her classroom kind of every morning. She had this thing called the Muma Alumni Center. So we would just hang out in her room. That's what she called her room. And one day she was the bowling team captain, or bowling team, what do they call him? Coach. There we go. I don't care about sports.
Maybe for bowling, it's like baseball. It's a manager.
No, she was the coach.
Okay,
That's what they called her. She didn't coach us though. She would just tell us we were terrible. But one day she was like, hey, there was a group of our friends who all hung out there, and she was like, do you guys want to go bowling for free every Tuesday? And we were like, sure. And she's like, yeah, you guys could play 3 games, bowl for free, have fun. And we were like, yeah, let's do it. So the worst part is like for the people who actually care about bowling, they hated our team. Because we were just having a grand old time.
Oh, you didn't care?
We didn't care.
When you were in competition?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Eventually, like, the more we did it, we started to care. Like, I would actually, like, I'd get frustrated if I was having a bad day. But at the beginning, it was just like, let's have fun. Why not? So the bowling team literally comprised of 5 of my closest friends.
Wow.
And it was our favorite teacher doing it. So we would just have a great time.
See, that's perfect. It's like having an extracurricular activity that's a lot of fun with a bunch of people that, without pressure.
Right.
And it is unique to put on a college admission form, like captain of the bowling team.
Yeah, I don't know if that really got me into University of Tampa, but
sure, it didn't hurt.
Probably.
Nice. So, Andres, we are in the beginning weeks of February. We're about a week away from Valentine's Day.
Oh, yeah.
So, we were talking yesterday about Valentine's Day, and as a single guy, what's your feelings about Valentine's Day?
I have such mixed feelings, Kev. So, growing up, and I was telling you this, my dad really loves holidays. My dad's a really big holiday guy. So, growing up, I would watch my dad kind of like he would go to the nines for my stepmom, and my stepmom would do the same for him. They would always either like plan a weekend away for Valentine's Day, or specifically on Valentine's Day, they would go out for a date and then they would come home. And I would always kind of see this just really big display of love. One of my dad's love languages is definitely gifts. And both of my parents would just come home and there were like stacks and stacks of presents. I'm talking about like 2 or 3 stacks like this high of presents. And they would just open them with each other. And I loved watching them open them with each other because it wasn't like they were just getting gifts to get gifts. It was like stuff that they knew both people would like. And it was just something that I was like, man, I really love this. And then my mom set up a really bad expectation. Every Valentine's Day growing up, my mom would get each one of her kids, there's 8 of us, would get us a gift and would leave it upstairs so we'd get ready for school. And there was a teddy bear with chocolate and a note from my mom. So there was just this like, wow, I really love Valentine's Day. I'm also a really big hopeless romantic, love all the rom-coms. So I love Valentine's Day, but then there's also the reality of when you're single, Valentine's Day sucks. Because you're like, well, what the heck am I going to do? And then you add on like the Christianese stuff, and people are like, I'm going to go on a date with Jesus. And you're like, that sounds stupid. What would you do that for? Go sit at a restaurant by yourself. So it's mixed feelings. I think during holidays, especially kind of Valentine's Day, there's a loneliness that also kind of arises in that of like, well, you're seeing everybody post on Instagram of, their significant other and how much they love them. And there's almost a part of you that's like, I'm lacking something or I'm missing out on something.
Which is obviously, it's accentuated by February 14th.
Right.
But that's often a common feeling that a lot of people have in our world, but specifically we're talking today about within community of faith, within the sanctuary community, within just being part of the church and the body of Christ, that often there is this feeling of aloneness or loneliness, or especially when you're talking about dating and marriage. And so we're going to just dive into that today, Andres, and I thank you for being willing to share. So let's talk. We have done one podcast already on singleness.
Heather Lovelit, she did such an awesome job.
Heather Lovelit crushed it, and it's still the most viewed podcast in the history of Sanctuary. And so if you haven't had a chance to watch that, I would encourage you to go back into our archives and watch Heather.
Yeah, there's so much wisdom in it.
There is, absolutely.
Yeah.
So obviously we're not going to replace that podcast, but I thought it would be good to talk about because, working especially with a young adults community and even in your high school community you're dealing with, it's a big deal. Relationships, the expectations of all of those things are a massive deal. Now, we're just using Valentines Day as a springboard to talk through this subject. But,
right.
So talk to me about some either lessons you've learned or are learning or dealing with in this era of right now of being a single young adult guy, living in a world and in a Christian community of faith.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is just knowing it's hard. It's not easy. I think when you watch podcasts, I like watching vlogs. When I was in college, every night I would rip through like 3 or 4 different like wedding videos. But when you kind of look at, I guess, Christian culture, there's almost this highlight of marriage and how good it is. And kind of one of the phrases that I've always hated, and we've talked about this, is almost when you hear the pastor talking and they're like, oh, the Lord called me into a season of singleness, and 2 weeks later, I found my wife. And you're like, okay, great. I've been doing this for how long now? But I think what I've struggled with throughout that is never really hearing the struggle in that. The struggle of actually being single. The struggle of like, hey, there are a lot of things that you're constantly surrendering. And that's, the past 2 years for me, that's been a constant of like realizing, wait, there are a bunch of areas in my life that I actually haven't surrendered to Jesus, or there are things in my life that I haven't surrendered to Jesus yet. And nobody talks about how hard that is. Yeah. Or even allowing the Lord to do like internal spiritual work on your heart. Nobody talks about that process. Usually people talk about singleness, and it's great because they're trying to encourage singles and like, take advantage of the season, look at who's around you and just pour yourself out and, throw yourself into, and it's like, yeah, that's all great. But nobody talks about when you're sitting at home at 10 o'clock at night, scrolling through Instagram, and you're seeing all of these couples together. Yeah. Or when you're out at a cafe and you're seeing a 13 and 14-year-old couple, and you're like, wow, that's nice. At least they're enjoying their lives. For now, right. Yeah, until the massive breakup happens because you thought you were going to marry them. But nobody talks about kind of the inner struggles that I think a single person faces in the midst of that waiting period. And even the idea that you're waiting to get married. That's something that I'm sure we'll talk about of something I had to learn is not to expect that I am going to get married. And that's been probably the past year of my life of really learning what it looks like to surrender that.
Well, and as you said, Andres, for those of us who are followers of Jesus, we know that the whole journey of faith and following Jesus is a journey of surrender. It starts with surrendering your whole life to the Lord. Yeah. But then there's that continuing process of every area of life learning how to surrender. At BlackRock, they're doing a whole year of living wholeheartedly, which means about surrender to the Lord, surrender to Jesus. And it is a process, and it's a daily decision to pick up your cross daily and follow him as one of surrender. And you're right, we talk about the principle of it, but then we often don't talk about the process or how we're doing in that process. Right. It just becomes like this hard slugfest of trying to deal with it. But I think it's good. I think it's one of the reasons why we want to talk about this topic for that. And, there's a couple different things that even in what you just shared, which I appreciate, is, a couple different topics. One of them is I hear this feeling of almost from a lot of people who are in a phase or maybe in an undefined, it could be your entire life, a phase of singleness. Oh, yeah. The feeling of being content or discontent. Yeah. Talk to me about things that you've learned or experienced or seen other people in that phase. Because all of us are dealing with some level of discontent in some area of life at times. Sure. But specifically in singleness, what have you learned?
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting excuse me. It's been an interesting walk of learning what it looks like to be content. And even before we kind of talked about me doing this podcast, I had even said to you, Kev, if you're looking for someone who is content in their singleness, I can't say that I'm there yet. I'm still learning what it looks like to be content in my singleness. And there was something you said Sunday that just really, when you were talking about your car analogy or the experience you and Carrie had in Australia.
Driving from a long drive from Sydney to Brisbane.
Right. Right.
And yeah.
And you were talking about how you were so focused on the destination.
Yeah.
Where were you going? And Carrie was just focused on you guys and the kids and, just wanting to have a good time and enjoy the time that you guys had together. And I'm a very futuristic thinker. I've thought about getting married since I was probably about 5 or 6. So that's always been a dream of mine, a desire of mine. I've almost kind of tried to fix my life towards that's the ultimate goal. So how do I get there? And that was before I loved Jesus, knew who Jesus was.
Sure.
But it was just, I had this really big desire. So all of my life, I've kind of fixed myself towards this, like, how do I get to that one goal? How do I make sure I get there? Because if I get there, I'll be content. I'll be happy. Everything I've ever wanted, I'll find. In learning, I think over the past 2 years, that's not necessarily the case. I've been in 2 long-term relationships, and even in that have found, hey, I really enjoy being with this person, but there still is a loneliness that's not being satisfied by this person. It's something that only Jesus can fill, but I didn't realize that until after the fact.
Sure.
And then kind of coming out of that, getting to a place of like, how do I just enjoy the people that are around me? How do I really just take in like, hey, what has God called me to right now? And not focused on, hey, there's this thing over here that could one day possibly happen.
Yeah.
But really saying like, what am I doing right now? And how do I just enjoy where I'm at now? And a big part of that is even, how do I just enjoy my friends? How do I get to just enjoy being with them? As a guy, I think as a young adult, also not expecting that every guy or girl you meet is like your next potential spouse, and learning what it looks like to just, how do I just be a good friend? How do I make sure that I'm a good friend to my guy friends and to my girlfriends?
Yeah.
And learning even how to be content in having a really good community around me, where there isn't a need of like, oh man, I feel like I'm lacking because there isn't someone who's always with me, but knowing like, man, I have a group of people that I can go back to and share my successes with, share my victories, share some really hard places and kind of hard times with, and know that I have a group of people. I'm not relying on one person.
Right.
Yeah.
There's so much truth in there and wisdom in there and just even vulnerability with that because, I'll go back to one of the things that I have seen.
Yeah.
Especially living in a community of faith and in the church, being a part of the church. And the church does a lot of things well. I think that over the last 50 to 60 years especially, now I'm not 60 years old, so regardless of what other people in this room may think, I'm not 60 years old. But in looking at kind of modern church history, at least in American culture, we've seen the breakdown of the family, and we've seen marriages and statistics of marriage and divorce in the church equal or be almost at parity with what's happening in the world.
Yeah.
So even in the church, we have almost a 50% divorce rate.
Yeah.
And so I think the church is going, oh man, we're not really modeling healthy relationships in marriage. So I think in the church that there has been a good heart to say, let's talk about healthy marriages. Let's have marriage classes. Let's have, pre-marriage counseling. I think that's all great.
Yeah.
I love that because it's needed and it's helpful, especially if you don't have good models of marriage at home.
Yeah.
You're going to often repeat what you've seen. You talked about Valentine's Day. You saw your parents, have an amazing Valentine's Day every year. That's a good thing, but then it also models something that you can't live up to right now, especially.
Right.
So, but I think in the church that's happened.
Yeah.
And so there's been almost a swinging of the pendulum to the other side where you can't be in a church where you're not hearing about marriage.
Yeah.
As either what you're dealing with now, because they're almost assuming that everyone in your church is married, or it is that destination goal. It's reinforcing that thing that, hey, the finish line
right.
of adolescence is marriage.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it creates that thing of this feeling of, if the church is talking about marriage all the time and I'm not currently in that, either that's that feeling of other, that's not, affirming or encouraging, or it's this feeling of it continues to model and exemplify a discontentment of. So if this is the ultimate goal and we're talking about this at church all the time and I'm not there, then what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
Or what's wrong with the situation? Do you see that as well?
Yeah, totally. I think, most places you go. You go on a men's retreat, and the examples that are usually used are, hey, to be a good father, to be a good husband, we want to make sure you're a good dad. But for the 25-year-old guy that's sitting there saying, but I'm single, I don't have any of that, or even for the 30-year-old, 40-year-old guy who's never been in that. It's almost like, well, if I'm not a dad or a husband, then I don't have an identity, because it almost seems like there's no worth put on who I am and the season I'm in right now, or what God is calling me to. How do I learn how to just be a good man?
Yeah.
How do I learn how to be a follower of Jesus as a man, and then vice versa as a female? The messaging of a lot of what our females are hearing are, how to be a good mom, how to be a good wife to your husband. And not necessarily what does biblical womanhood look like, what does biblical manhood look like.
Preparing for marriage. Preparing to be a husband, preparing to be a wife.
Right.
That create that expectation rather than preparing to follow Jesus.
Right.
Whatever that looks like.
Right. And I think that's even, when you hear, when people are talking about, the others that aren't married or dads, it is that, well, you need to do this so you can prepare to be a good husband and a good father, prepare to be a good wife or mother. And it's like, okay, but I just want, how do I follow Jesus?
Yeah.
And how do I do that in a way that honors him? And knowing, in Scripture, right, we see Paul and Jesus, two single guys.
Yeah.
Everything we do is kind of, really hinged on these two guys. That's where we really learn from. And even Paul saying, hey, I wish that there were more people who were single. Who kind of were following the path that I've led. And there are some killer people I know, even at BlackRock, that I'm like, man, you are in your 30s and 40s and you're single. You've never been married. And you are doing awesome things for the kingdom. But it almost sometimes gets overshadowed by that marriage part. Or it feels like, well, we need two people to lead a small group. Great to have a married couple do that.
Yeah.
Where it's like, yeah, but we have single people who are doing amazing things, but they get overshadowed by that.
Yeah, for real. And I think one of the things that I've seen you really grow in and being intentional about is your friendships.
Yeah.
Because if we learn how to even do that, I think that we're seeing more and more, and you're dealing with high school students and middle school students, is that we're often seeing people just struggling with relationships.
Oh, yeah.
Friendships, communication. How do I and loneliness is skyrocketing.
Yeah.
And that was before the pandemic.
Right.
The pandemic hits and it just accentuates a problem that we have. In that feeling of I often see right now it's the thing that we most desire is the thing that we're least equipped for.
Yeah.
Right now in relationships, romantic or otherwise.
Sure.
The thing that we most desire is the thing that we're least equipped for. So I think that's one thing that we as a community of faith is committed to, and that's why we did the series on We Get Closer, and why we talk about that is that is a core value of us. We were created to live in community.
Right.
We were created to get close. We were created for intimacy, and it's the thing that we're least equipped to have.
Yeah.
So learning how to do that without the pressure of going, hey, learn how to have good conversations with your friends so that you can have a great marriage.
Right.
Rather than just going, how about let's just have good friendships.
Yeah.
Good relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. And I even think part of kind of where I am right now, so I live with two guys. They're my interns. They're also friends of mine. And there have been moments where I've been like, man, if this is what married life is like, do I actually want this? But part of that is really learning, like, just even what is it like to live with other people?
Absolutely.
I lived with my parents for a majority of my life, went to college, had freshman year roommates, but then hated that. So lived by myself as an RA for 3 years, loved it, thrived, and then put back in a situation where it's like, you have to learn again of like, what is it like to, who did the dishes this week? Who didn't do the dishes this week? Did someone replace the toilet paper?
Right.
Did they not?
Do they hang their towels up?
How
they put the toilet paper on?
Right.
Those are all important things in life.
Right. But even learning, and not necessarily for marriage, but like, I'm learning so much about myself of, sometimes I have expectations of what I want someone to do or what I expect someone to do. And when they don't do it, I'm like, what the heck is your problem? So I grow this bitterness inside of me, and I'm upset over something. And then finally, when I speak out and I'm like, hey, by the way, I've been really upset about this, they're like, oh, dude, you should have just told me that before. Like I would have done it. But learning, like, yeah, how do I do friendships well?
Right.
How do I make sure that I am communicating to my friends? Hey, this is what I need, or hey, this is what I'm going through right now. Can you help me with that? If I'm having a bad day with my roommates, to be able to just tell them, hey, guys, I just need to go to my room. I don't really want to talk to anybody right now. Not mad at you. I'm just having a bad day.
Right.
And learning how to communicate with other people, knowing that, like, man, that's actually been filling my cup more because I'm learning what it's like to be in really close community with people and how to live that out, which is really awesome. And it kind of goes into even a conversation I was having with a high schooler one day where they were like, I feel like I just pour myself out and nobody ever gives me anything in return. And I said, okay, have you ever told your friends that? And they said, no. Why would I? Because then they're only going to do it because I told them. And I was like, okay, but they're doing it because they love you and they didn't know that wasn't the case.
Right.
But if we don't learn how to communicate that now, we're just going to have broken relationships for the rest of our lives, whether it's a marriage or just friendships. We're always going to have these kind of unmet expectations because we're also not communicating what we need.
And my experience is that phrase you just used is those unmet expectations are the things that kill relationships.
Yeah.
It's also the thing in me, and I think in most people, that breeds discontentment.
Yeah.
I have an expectation. That expectation isn't being met. I didn't even know I had that expectation until it's not being met, that unmet expectation. Now I realize it's not being met, and therefore I'm discontent with either the person or the situation or the relationship. And that happens like you said, in every arena of relationship.
Yeah.
It happens with friends and roommates and even siblings and parents, as well as work relationships.
Oh, yeah.
We work together.
Yeah.
And I see, the thing that often kills a team dynamic and breaks trust is not when because people do something egregious that were just on purpose, you're a jerk, lacked character. It's usually that, oh, you didn't do this, and I expected you to do this, and now I'm struggling with contentment.
Right.
And it breaks relationship.
Yeah.
So Andres, let's talk about this. We briefly talked about this before.
Yeah.
What are some probably either unspoken expectations that people have in the season of singleness that lead to discontentment?
Yeah, that's good. It was something you brought up to me, just as from knowing me for a while, that I had never really thought of. You had said, Andres, maybe there's an expectation that because you follow Jesus, you deserve to get married. Maybe that's something that you kind of picked up and along your walk kind of said, well, yeah, that makes sense. If I do this, if I follow Jesus, then you're going to bless me with a marriage, with a good, healthy Christian, God-serving, God-fearing marriage. And that was something I had to wrestle through of nowhere in Scripture is there a promise of like, hey, you're going to get married. Right. And I've got the perfect person set aside for you who's going to complete you.
The one.
Right, the one. Don't even get me started on that. We can talk about the expectation of the one. But really wrestling through with nowhere in Scripture does God say, I'm going to give you a marriage because you follow me. And really having to wrestle with that, well, God, but I really desire this. But I have to start walking away from, not necessarily walking away from that desire, but have to start really working through well, why do I think that that's what I deserve? That's what you should give me. My expectation of you is that you're going to bless me with this because I follow you. And that's been really hard. And part of that, to be honest with you, and it's part of me, even me processing now, is because my parents split up when I was young. I was around 4. I don't really have a recollection of what my parents were like together. And I think there was part of me that when I finally became a Christian, right, I always had that desire to get married. When I finally became a Christian and saw other Christian married couples, it was almost this like, oh, this is the key. Following you and being obedient in what you're calling me to do, this is the key. And hearing people talk about, while I went into a season of singleness, intentional singleness, and I found my wife, it was almost like, oh, so these are the keys to unlock the door to get the thing that I most prize.
So sometimes I'll go through a pseudo season of singleness, hoping that that's the lure on the hook that gets God to give me something.
Right, and I can be completely honest and say, I remember in college people being like, Andres, are you okay with being single for the rest of your life? And I was leading Bible studies. I was the president of our organization, was like, oh yeah, of course. Because in the back of my head, I was like, well, Lord, do you hear that? I'm okay with my singleness. We're good. And really doing it as almost a way of like, maybe I can convince you,
exactly.
God.
All of heaven pauses. Did you hear that, God? He's ready. He's ready for this.
Right. And even in the past 2 years, having moments where I've been like, okay, God, like, I think we're good. Like, I'm pretty sure I'm content with this. Knowing in the back of my head, I'm like, no, I'm not. But maybe you got something for me, man. Come on. And really working through, like, I think peeling back those lies of knowing, like, no, I'm not okay with it. And one of the pastors here had pulled me aside one day, and we've had these conversations. And the question that he asked me was, is God still good if you never get married? And it was the first time that I really was like, Pastor G, I'm going to be honest with you. My head says yes. I mean, heck, I lead a high school ministry. Yeah. Like, I've been serving Jesus for 10 years. I've been following Jesus for 10 years. My head knows that God is good, regardless of the situation. But I don't know that my heart trusts that he is. Yeah. This is the one thing I desire most, right? I've told people before, I've wanted to do ministry since I got saved 10 years ago, 11 now. That means nothing to me next to being a dad or a husband. Wow. That's for me, it's like, if I got that and nothing else, that's awesome. But to really work through, like, hey, if God never gave this to me, would I still trust that, like, he's good and he's on the throne and he knows what he's doing? And that's been a struggle. And to have him even come to me at times and say, hey, if I never gave this to you, are you okay? Will you trust me? Will you continue to follow me? Am I still the good God that you tell high schoolers about, that you tell your friends about? Right. And really wrestling with that. And again, it comes to that contentment of, am I okay with me, Jesus, and the community that he's given to me? And that's been really hard. Yeah. But in that, I'm starting to find freedom of, I don't have to find who I am in somebody else. The expectation of the one who's going to complete you. Right. It's that expectation that there's someone who will complete me and give me everything I need. Yeah. But no human will ever do that. The only thing that can is God.
Yeah. And I totally agree with that, Andres, because when I see people, including myself, I'll speak for myself, if the expectation is that there's this other person that will complete me. Yeah. So I need to be whole and they need to be whole so we can complete each other. There's some truth in that, and I can tell you the most powerful lies always contain truth, some form of truth. The most convincing lies, that's even why the enemy tried to manipulate Scripture. And so I see that happening. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He'll give you the desires of your heart. Yeah. Oh, so that's the formula. I've delighted in the Lord. I'm serving the Lord. I'm a high school dean. I'm a small group leader. I'm on the worship team. I come to Sanctuary every week. Yeah. And therefore, I've delighted myself in the Lord. He's going to give me the desires of my heart. And the desires of my heart it looks like this. Yep. An amazing spouse who makes me feel whole and complete, and who I can live with the rest of my life, and it's like a Hallmark movie for all my days. Right. If that isn't there, then God, it's a bait and switch. You don't give me the desires of my heart. Yeah. Wait, because this is the desire of my heart, and I fulfilled my end of the deal. Yeah. And so you haven't fulfilled your end of the deal. So therefore, the next thing is usually going, now I'm going to step in
Oh, yeah.
and go get what I want or I desire, or I'm going to fill that need. And it is a God-given need, like you talked about, to recognize I'm not content. Well, part of that is because we have a God-given need for fellowship, for friendship, for intimacy, for connection, for community to do life together. And I think it's okay to go, I'm discontent with not feeling connection.
Yeah.
Where it goes bad is that lie of going, and I'll only feel content if it looks like this.
Yeah.
And so I think that kind of, what I also see then is it kind of puts people on the hunt.
Oh, yeah.
And when you're on the hunt, you miss a lot of other good things.
Sure.
Like I love a good bargain. And I go for a hunt, right? I go to thrift stores. I was on the hunt for Carrie wanted, it doesn't matter. She wanted a small piece of furniture to try a new refinishing technique. And I was like, oh, I'll go get it. I'll go to Savers and Goodwill and all these places.
Yeah.
And I was on the hunt. So I was in and out just looking for that thing. And if I didn't find it, then when I was at Savers, I was like, well, wait, while I'm here, let's see what else is around.
Right.
And I came home with 2 amazing buys of shirts. Now, it's a stupid analogy to say sometimes even people coming into the sanctuary community, if they're on the hunt for the one, or on the hunt to fill this need, or on the hunt of my loneliness will get filled if I do this.
Yeah.
Like you said, they're missing out sometimes on the fact that there's 150 young people that they could have deep friendship with. Not all 150, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That you're going to miss because you're on the hunt for one thing. You're missing something that God can do in your life.
Yeah. And I mean, I've seen it in my own life. I think a couple weeks ago, you led the staff through kind of a prayer exercise of looking at the gifts of the Spirit and asking the Lord, what fruit
of the
fruits?
Spirit.
Yeah, fruit of the Spirit, not gifts of the Spirit. Fruit of the Spirit, are you really like, is the Lord working on right now? And the Lord said self-control and patience. And when I said, well, why those two? He said, well, because when you grow impatient, you start to take control. And I said, oh, that would make sense.
Yeah, it does, right?
And I've recognized it in my own life of in times where I'm really, really lonely, I've put myself in a position where it's like, well, I just want to find a female to talk to try to find some worth. And then weeks down the line, I'm like, I think I was just really lonely. And now I've hurt someone else and hurt myself in the process if they felt like there was something there because I was just lonely. Or I've put myself where I'm like, and people have done this, where it's like, oh, well, they're just a really nice guy or a really nice girl. And you're like, okay, cool. And I haven't done this. I'm going to preface that. And then you're like, okay, well, so where do they go to church? Do they love the Lord? What's going on? And they're like, oh, I haven't asked that, or no, I don't think so. I just really enjoy talking to them. And you're like, dude, that's awesome. But somewhere down the line, someone's going to get hurt. And a lot of it is out of this fear of, well, if God's not going to do it, then maybe I can do it for myself. And I've learned over time, I can't trust myself in that sometimes. And that goes back to, I was talking to you the other day. Completely different example. A year ago, I bought brand new car. Super awesome to be in that position to be able to do that. Went to my first kind of car dealership. The guy gives me a second tier car. I didn't know that. Super nice, had everything I wanted. Gave me a price, and I was like, that's too expensive. That's going to be more of a sacrifice for me to make.
Yeah.
Then kind of maybe a week or so later, went to a different car dealership, got in this car because I was thinking that this car had all of the bells and whistles that the other car did. I was like, okay, great, let's work through this. The guy gave me a really good deal. It was about $60 less than what I was going to be paying. And I was like, dude, this is great. I'm making a steal here. Come on. And maybe about a month or so later, I was driving in the car and was just like thinking about both interactions I had and kind of had this revelation of, wait, the first car I drove was a second tier model. It was $60 more than what the initial offer I gave. But after, putting insurance on the car and all that dumb stuff, I realized I'm paying the same amount for a first model car than a second tier model car that because I was impatient. Because I just wanted a new car and I had it in front of me and was like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. And I can't wait to, drive in. I forget, it was Christmas Eve service. I got it around Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
I remember driving up and I was like, dude, I feel like the man. And a month later, I was like, no, actually, because of your impatience, you actually got a model lower than what you wanted.
Yeah.
And just knowing, like, sometimes we settle even in, like, our loneliness because we're like, we just want somebody.
Right.
Instead of realizing, like, hey, if I wait and I actually practically think through a relationship or practically think through, where am I right now? Am I in a healthy place? Like, I'm settling for something so much less than what God has for me just because I'm lonely and I think that this person can fill that.
Right. Yeah, I love that because you're talking about the fact of just feeling both impatience, which leads to self-control issues.
Yeah.
And we do that in so many times of life. We talked yesterday. I'm like, sometimes, being on the hunt when you're really lonely is like going to the grocery store when you're hungry.
Yeah.
Like
just grabbing a whole bunch of junk. That looks good. That looks good.
Everything starts.
I've
to
never
look
tried
good.
that.
Exactly. Like you just get something in my belly now, right? Which leads to poor decisions.
Yeah.
And that's or a lack of self-control, which I think goes back to what you said. The question ultimately with anything, but specifically we're talking about singleness, because we know in Scripture, both singleness and marriage are both gifts.
Yeah.
And if we, and then it goes back to, do I trust God in His goodness? When we define what His goodness is supposed to look like, do we miss sometimes the gifts that He's giving us now?
Yeah.
Because it feels like consolation prize, or it's not what I would say is good.
Right.
So sometimes our trust in God's goodness is often attached to a specific outcome.
Yeah.
And learning how to go, no, I'll still trust you, even when this doesn't look good or feel good, or I'm struggling through the inner tensions that this brings.
Yeah.
And I think you're smart to even go, what's causing that inner tension in me? What's causing that discontentment? Why am I feeling lonely?
Yeah.
Have I gone through this my entire life? How
Right.
can God deal with those inner world things? Knowing that if God has a gift of marriage for me, if I deal with that stuff now, I bring that healing and that process as a gift into that marriage.
Sure.
If God has singleness as a gift, or it's a timing issue, or whatever, that's still the gift that God's giving me.
Yeah.
That I need to appreciate.
Yeah.
That helps with the impatience of, but I want it and I want it now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think sometimes too, and I can only talk about myself. I think sometimes we also look at marriage as this like grass is always greener on the other side.
For real.
Nice to always have somebody around, someone to always talk to go places with. But then on the opposite end, in talking to you or talking to some of my other married friends,
Don't get me in trouble here, Andres.
I'm not. Don't worry.
Good.
But there are certain things where it's like, this past year, not necessarily wise, I think I went on like 5 or 6 different vacations. I didn't have to confirm with anybody. Is that okay? Are you good if I go away? Or I have to worry about 2 plane expenses and make sure that the hotel room's bigger. I just got to go and experience life, got to enjoy community back in Florida with friends. And there was a freedom that sometimes my married friends don't necessarily have.
Yeah.
Or a freedom to say, I could stay out until 2 or 3 in the morning. I don't have to worry about, is someone waiting at home for me?
Right.
I can hang out with a group of friends for as long as I think there's so many different freedoms that I think we look at and we're like, oh, well, I can't wait for this, but also knowing with that marriage comes a whole bunch of added responsibility that you don't have as a single person.
Right.
And sometimes we can look at it as, well, at least you get to do that with somebody. That's mine. I would love to do that with somebody.
Sure.
But if I was doing that with somebody, could I go on 5 different vacations in a year?
No.
Could I hang out until 2 or 3 in the morning with friends? Probably not every night.
No,
you know, and really trying to learn, you know, even with high schoolers. Last night I was here until 10:15. Mm-hmm. Why? Because there were high schoolers here, and I just love hanging out with them. And I didn't have to worry about like, oh, is somebody going to be upset because I'm not home? It was just like, no, I just really enjoy getting to take advantage of the fact that this is my job.
Yeah.
And I get to spend extra time pouring into students.
Absolutely. And even 1 Corinthians 7, the famous passage which Paul is saying, hey, you know, about talking about singleness is from his perspective. And he even says, this isn't the Lord speaking, this is Paul speaking.
Right.
That singleness is preferred because singleness has its own, and I think some of the translations actually use the word anxiety or being anxious.
Sure.
Singleness has its own worries and concerns, but so does marriage.
Yeah.
But the other thing that marriage adds to a layer of responsibility, concern, and anxiousness and worry is that feeling of divided. Can I do everything that God's called me to do?
Sure.
Can I enjoy the season that God's calling me to do? Can I just say yes to the Lord instantly?
Right. And just leave.
And just
or give money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Without it causing concerns, anxiety, and worry for yourself in another area of life or for other people in your life that you are now responsible to live in harmony with and in unity with, thus pleasing the Lord. And again, like we said, this is a journey.
Yeah.
Everything in life is a journey. So thanks for sharing the lessons you've learned today. Thanks for making yourself vulnerable. There's a lot of people, I'm sure, on that have either gift of singleness or marriage who listen to this and go, wow, I can learn. Because some of the lessons you're talking about right now, I can tell you married people need to learn too.
Yeah.
And probably wished they had learned before.
Right.
Because the stakes are different.
Yeah.
Andres, thanks so much. This is a topic that I think we need to talk about more in the church in general and in life in general.
Yeah.
But I just appreciate your learned and growing and earned wisdom and in these things. Can you do me a huge favor?
Yeah.
Can you just release a blessing to those who are listening with God's peace and patience and that trust level like you're talking about needed in all things?
Yeah. You want me to look at the camera?
Absolutely.
Look right into your eyes, guys.
That's right.
Yeah. Hey, for those of you who are watching who are single, I do bless you with peace that surpasses all understanding, with fellowship with God that is unlike anything you've experienced before, that is better than any friendship or relationship that you could ever have. And for my married folk, I bless you with love and patience from the Lord that really is wrapping all of you, that makes you whole, that defines you, that gives you identity and hope for the future. So,
amen and amen.
Amen.
Thanks, Andres, and thanks for all of you guys who are listening to this podcast or watching it online on YouTube at Sanctuary CT or on Spotify or wherever you listen to these podcasts. Do us a favor, please subscribe, like, share in any way possible. That would be great. This is some really good content and life lessons and learn. So if you share it, it will bless others and be a blessing to us. Please leave comments in the comments section. And hope to see you on Sunday nights at 5 o'clock for those of you who are 18 to 35 as part of the Sanctuary community. Bless you guys. Have an amazing day.